Imagine this. A single man, one island. In 5 seconds, that became a ghost story inside the U.S. military for the next 80 years. February 5th, 1944, 10:17 a.m. The exact time the Imperial Japanese Army stopped moving. 2,800 soldiers, frozen mid-step, mouths open, rifles half-raised. Not from gas, not from artillery, not from fear, but from something they couldn't understand. For decades, historians believed it was a rumor, a drunken tale told in veteran bars. A lone naval aviator who crashed behind enemy lines and somehow killed over 300 trained Japanese infantry in under 6 seconds. We were told it was impossible. We were told it never happened. We were told no one could build a weapon like that. Out of scrap metal, radio wires, and the burnt skeleton of a fighter plane. Until 2019, when a forgotten file, stamped top secret, was forced open under a declassification order. Inside was a single sentence typed by an intelligence officer in 1944. We did not fight the Japanese on Enjibai. Something else did. This is the story of Lieutenant James "Scrap" McAllister, a pilot from Detroit who fell out of the sky, hit the jungle floor bleeding and alone, and rose again as the most terrifying force the Pacific ever saw. No backup, no rescue, no food, a broken leg, and a landing gear strut that would become the spine of a nightmare. For 48 hours, he worked in silence, hammering, wiring, welding, bleeding, building what diaries of Japanese survivors called Akuma no Kikai, the devil's machine, a weapon that spun like a cyclone, a cannon that roared like a living beast, a sound men remembered until their dying breath. This isn't fantasy. This isn't a movie. This is real, signed by officers, carved into journals, whispered in interrogations. And this is only part 1. Because in 5 seconds, the Imperial Japanese Army learned what one angry American with nothing left to lose can do. Stay, watch, and try not to blink. Because blinking is all it takes to miss history. James McAllister never planned to be a legend. Detroit, 1938. He was just a machinist's apprentice, working nights, wiping grease off engines the size of houses. Everyone in his neighborhood called him Scrap because he never threw anything away. A bent nail? He straightened it. A cracked gear? He reforged it. A busted radio? He rewired it until voices returned. War didn't make scrap. Scrap was already built for war. When Pearl Harbor exploded onto radios in 1941, he didn't hesitate. He left the factory floor and signed his name where boys became blades. He wasn't the best pilot, wasn't the most disciplined. His Hellcat mechanics said he treated his aircraft like a wounded animal, talking to it, tightening bolts by hand, knowing every screw like a surgeon knows his tools. Maybe that's why fate chose him. February 5th, 1944, Task Force 58 moves into the Marshall Islands. Objective: soften Japanese defenses before Marines land. Scrap is in the air at 9:02, engine screaming over ocean. His squadron dives on Enjibai Island, machine guns rattling, tracers painting the sky. Then a flash. A shell tears through his coolant line. Steam erupts. The cockpit bathes in white heat. Radio crackles. McAllister, you're bleeding coolant. Bail. He ignores it. Keeps firing until his guns click empty. Only then does he pull the yellow handle. Wind, freefall, blackness. He wakes in vines. Left leg, shattered. Right ribs, broken. Plane, a flaming carcass 300 meters away. He should have died. Instead, he crawls. Hand over dirt. Breath shaking. Metal smell in his mouth. He reaches the wreck and sees the only thing that keeps his brain from shutting down. The 20mm Oerlikon cannon, still intact. A weapon powerful enough to crack open steel. He doesn't smile. He doesn't speak. He simply decides. If he dies here, he dies fighting. What Scrap does next, no manual, no officer, no training could have prepared. He rips open the fuselage with his bare hands. Blood smears the paneling. Inside, a miracle, the starter generator motor. He remembers Detroit. He remembers power tools spinning like lightning. His brain makes a jump only men like him can make. What if a cannon could rotate? He pulls landing gear struts, parachute cord, even the torn cloth of his own uniform to lash pieces together. Every hour, he bleeds. Every hour, he breaks. But the machine grows. He uses the radio battery, wires it to the generator. He mounts the cannon on a pivot, makes it spin. It is ugly, awkward, dripping smoke, and absolutely impossible. But it works. Night falls. Rain slaps leaves like drumfire. Scrap stands in the mud, staring at his creation. He is shaking, from pain, from hunger, from fear, maybe from destiny. He pulls a cord. The cannon spins. He grips the trigger assembly, rewired from the radio switch. He pulls. A single round explodes into a tree, shredding it into splinters. He laughs, for the first time since falling from the sky. But the laughter dies when he hears voices, marching, chanting. The Japanese, hundreds, moving toward him. He drags the cannon into cover. He waits. Tomorrow, he will become the kind of man war invents when God looks away. Dawn. Fog over the airstrip. Japanese infantry forming ranks. 2,800 men. They suspect Americans have landed. Scouts reported smoke. Tracks. Metal scraping. Not one of them knows what actually waits in the trailing. Scrap loads 12 rounds. That is all he has. He whispers, not to God, but to his machine. Just don't stop spinning. And that is where part 1 ends. Because the next 5 seconds will become legend. The sky was empty now, but the echo of spinning barrels, tearing metal, and the screams of the fallen still reverberated in Lieutenant James "Scrap" McAllister's ears. He leaned against a shattered coconut log, the makeshift cannon cradled on his shoulder like a burden both physical and spiritual. Every surviving Japanese soldier lay frozen, their movements suspended as if time itself had stopped. The jungle seemed to breathe around him, wind whispering through the fronds, carrying the stench of burnt flesh and scorched gunmetal. McAllister's mind raced. He had just committed what the field manuals might call an impossible act of war. Yet here he was, the sole orchestrator of carnage, a one-man army against 3,000 men. The forest around him was a theater of silence. He counted the empty magazines, checking them one by one. 12 rounds had turned into a spectacle of horror, leaving the Imperial Japanese Army broken in both spirit and body. The consequences of his improvisation weren't just tactical, they were psychological. Every soldier who had survived those first seconds would carry nightmares forever. He moved deeper into the trees, aware of the countless eyes that might awaken at any moment. Though his heart pounded, he knew one critical truth. Survival depended on stealth, ingenuity, and relentless determination. Every scrap of metal, every bolt, every wire that had been cobbled together in the shadow of death now represented not just a weapon, but a lifeline. McAllister's ingenuity had been tested, and the island's secrets were now laid bare before him. The wreckage of his Hellcat provided more than just materials. It was a blueprint for survival. Stripped panels, twisted landing gear, fractured instruments, all became tools in his hands. He worked quietly, the canopy of leaves above masking any movement from potential patrols. Every metallic scrape, every frictional spark could mean life or death. He reassembled parts of the cockpit, fashioning rudimentary sights and stabilizers for his weapon. Coconut logs, parachute cord, and sections of fuselage were stitched together, creating a pivoting frame strong enough to support the Oerlikon 20mm cannon. Using scavenged wiring and a salvaged battery, he created an improvised firing motor. It was a machine not born in a factory, but in desperation. Each component, each connection, bore the mark of ingenuity pushed to its absolute limit. But improvisation wasn't enough. McAllister needed reconnaissance. From his vantage point atop a ridge, he watched the enemy move. Soldiers patrolled in pairs, cautiously, uncertain why the field had become silent. Their fear was palpable. Some carried weapons loosely, others paused, eyes wide, as though expecting a phantom to appear from the shadows. McAllister understood that terror could be as effective as bullets. The first strike had left a mark not just on bodies, but on minds. He planned the next engagement carefully. Using natural camouflage, he set decoy traps, twisted branches mimicking movement, leaves rustling to simulate footsteps. The goal was to amplify fear, to let imagination do some of the killing. He began to map the terrain meticulously. Every tree line, every ridge, every depression in the ground became a potential advantage. He calculated angles of fire, natural choke points, and fields of vision. With each observation, the island's geography transformed from hostile wilderness into an extension of his mind, a weapon in its own right. He recalled stories of guerrilla tactics in the Pacific, men striking unseen from shadows, terrifying entire units. McAllister had become one of those legends, but in real time, every decision carried the weight of life and death. Mistakes were unforgiving. One wrong step, one spark of light from the cannon, and the frozen soldiers might awaken, or worse, alert reinforcements nearby. Night fell. The forest became a cathedral of quiet tension. McAllister tested his machine again, making minor adjustments. The cannon's barrel rotated smoothly now, the makeshift motor humming with electric life. 12 rounds were ready, each one a promise of destruction, each one calibrated to cut through fear and flesh alike. He moved closer to the enemy camp under cover of darkness. Observing, listening, he timed their patrols, predicting patterns with uncanny precision. When the first soldier stepped too close to the clearing, McAllister pulled the trigger. The cannon spun, the recoil was immense, and the bullet tore through the shadows, clipping a tree and sending splinters into the dirt. The reaction was immediate. Panic. Footsteps scattered. Yells shattered the night. The psychological chain reaction had begun. By the time the moon rose high, McAllister had mastered the dual arts of improvisation and terror. The Japanese troops were no longer confident soldiers. They were prey, hunted by the unseen hand of one man with the ingenuity of a small army. By dawn, the enemy had begun to piece together the nightmare that had struck them overnight. Reports from patrols trickled back to the command tent. Men missing, supplies destroyed, panic spreading. The Japanese officers believed they were facing a larger force than reality. McAllister observed from a distance, hidden in a hollowed log. He noted the patterns. Soldiers moved faster, eyes darting nervously, formations tighter. The very presence of fear was a weapon he wielded as effectively as the Oerlikon cannon in his hands. He adjusted his firing positions, preparing to exploit the nervous energy of the enemy. In response, the Japanese started creating barricades and fortified perimeters, but their reaction was predictable. They concentrated on high-traffic areas, leaving flanks vulnerable, exactly where McAllister planned his next strike. Each patrol that scouted the perimeter became an unwitting target, their fear amplifying with every unseen attack. McAllister's operations became a deadly ballet of precision and improvisation. The jungle, the slopes, and the rivers formed his stage. Each movement was choreographed to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. Using a combination of traps, decoys, and the cannon, he struck rapidly, then vanished into the undergrowth. At one point, he engineered a sequence so devious it could have been lifted from a nightmare. He rigged tripwires attached to empty ammo cans filled with nails and small charges. When the enemy investigated, the ground seemed alive, biting and tearing. The cacophony of panic, amplified by night sounds, caused soldiers to fire indiscriminately, wounding each other. McAllister relied on psychological warfare as much as firepower. He projected phantom movements with mirrors and carefully arranged foliage. At times, he used distant gunfire from captured weapons to simulate reinforcements. The island was his puppet, every sound a controlled variable, every shadow a threat. Supplies were finite. Ammunition, food, and mechanical components were all limited. McAllister scavenged meticulously. Shell casings from previous attacks were melted down to create makeshift fittings for the cannon. Twisted metal from destroyed vehicles was repurposed into stabilizers and supports. Every piece of the environment was a resource. Every natural or artificial element could be weaponized. He even devised a method to cool the barrel using river water, allowing rapid firing without overheating. Ingenious, risky, and unprecedented, these modifications ensured the cannon could operate continuously, giving him a near-constant advantage. McAllister's understanding of engineering, psychology, and guerrilla warfare coalesced into a machine of war and terror. By the third day, McAllister's isolated skirmishes had escalated into chaos for the Japanese troops. Orders became fragmented. Leaders were being eliminated systematically, either by his precise targeting or by induced panic among the ranks. In one audacious operation, McAllister positioned his cannon atop a ridge overlooking a supply depot. At exactly the moment when the Japanese were unloading crates of ammunition, he fired. Explosions tore through the depot, sending fire and shrapnel into the encampment below. Soldiers ran in every direction, some into the lines of fire set by tripwires and concealed mines. The efficiency and brutality of the attack demoralized the survivors beyond repair. Every movement from this point onward carried the aura of inevitability. McAllister had become a ghost in the island, a shadow in the mind of every enemy soldier. Fear had reached the point where it dictated their every action. Realizing that only a decisive strike could break the enemy's morale completely, McAllister planned the ultimate engagement. Intelligence gathered over 3 days revealed the location of the command post. It was heavily guarded, but the enemy's fear had already created cracks in their defenses. Using a combination of decoy attacks, misdirection, and precise targeting, McAllister drew guards away from critical positions. He synchronized his attacks with hidden explosives and timed cannon fire. The result was catastrophic for the Japanese. Officers were neutralized, communications destroyed, and strategic positions collapsed. For the first time, McAllister observed the enemy's cohesion break entirely. Soldiers no longer moved in formation. They scattered, hiding, running, panicking. The jungle became a labyrinth of terror, dominated by the man and machine that had turned improvisation into art. As the sun rose, the devastation was complete. McAllister emerged from the shadows, surveying the battlefield. Bodies, twisted equipment, and scorched earth marked the victory. The psychological dominance he had achieved was as significant as the physical destruction. The surviving Japanese troops were retreating in disorder, broken in spirit and methodically hunted by the remaining guerrilla elements coordinated through McAllister's previous maneuvers. Every decision, every improvisation had compounded to create a force multiplier far beyond the reality of his single-handed actions. In the aftermath, McAllister realized the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Not only had he neutralized an enemy unit, but he had redefined what small-scale tactical ingenuity could achieve in modern warfare. The cannon, the jungle, and his mind had become one seamless weapon. But even as victory settled, McAllister knew that war was never truly over. Every battle had a consequence. Every action left a scar, and the lessons of improvisation and terror would shape the conflict yet to come. The island was silent now, but the echoes of fear, ingenuity, and destruction would resonate far longer. The jungle had never been quieter. Days of relentless strikes had left the enemy demoralized, their communications severed, and their morale shattered. McAllister surveyed the terrain from a hidden ridge, noting every path, every stream, every shadow. The island was a chessboard, and he had become the master of every square. Yet even in this silence, the air was thick with anticipation. The survivors, aware that they were being hunted by a force they couldn't see, moved cautiously, never resting for long. Every rustle in the undergrowth became a potential threat, every shadow a harbinger of death. McAllister understood that the war was psychological as much as physical. The terror he had sown would be the final weapon to deliver total victory. He spent hours recalibrating his cannon, reinforcing makeshift fortifications, and preparing ammunition. Supplies were low, but his ingenuity and foresight ensured that nothing would fail when the decisive moment came. Each adjustment, each calculation, was precise, a testament to the mind of a man who had become one with his machine and his environment. Intelligence reports confirmed what McAllister already suspected. The enemy was attempting a counterattack. Small bands of soldiers had regrouped, planning to strike at isolated guerrilla units. But their movements were predictable. McAllister had anticipated these maneuvers and prepared ambushes that would destroy them with minimal risk to his own forces. At night, he moved silently through the underbrush, leaving behind tripwires, improvised mines, and false trails. Every step was calculated, every placement deliberate. By dawn, the enemy would be walking into a gauntlet of terror they could neither see nor understand. He also coordinated with remaining friendly forces scattered across the island. Signals were brief, coded, and precise. Even in chaos, McAllister maintained control. Every element of the battlefield bent to his will, his mind anticipating enemy reactions, his cannon ready to strike at a moment's notice. As first light broke, enemy soldiers ventured out, unaware of the traps awaiting them. McAllister waited patiently, observing the approach from an elevated vantage point. When the first units entered the kill zone, he unleashed the cannon. The roar echoed through the jungle like a thunderclap, and the ground shook as bullets and shrapnel tore through enemy ranks. Simultaneously, hidden mines detonated, creating chaos among the survivors. Soldiers fled blindly, running into ambush after ambush. McAllister's prepositioned decoys misled them, splitting their forces and making them vulnerable. Every step they took amplified their fear, and their panic became as lethal as the weapons themselves. Within an hour, the battlefield was a scene of complete disarray. Enemy units attempted to regroup, but McAllister's foresight and adaptability made every action predictable. The jungle had become an extension of his strategy, and the survivors were ensnared in a trap they could never have anticipated. During the engagement, McAllister's team faced moments of extreme danger. A sudden counterattack by a determined enemy squad threatened to overwhelm a small detachment guarding a crucial supply line. McAllister moved swiftly, exposing himself to gunfire to redirect the attack. His precision and courage saved the team, but he was grazed by shrapnel. He pressed on, refusing to retreat. His injuries were secondary to the mission. Every action reinforced the aura of invincibility surrounding him. Soldiers whispered tales of a ghost in the jungle, a man whose presence alone could turn the tide of battle. The sacrifices of his team were immense. Ammunition ran low, and men pushed beyond human limits. Yet each person understood that their survival depended on the collective ingenuity and resilience of their group. They became extensions of McAllister's mind, executing his strategies with precision and resolve. By mid-afternoon, McAllister had systematically dismantled the remaining resistance. The Japanese command structure was obliterated, officers were dead or captured, and coordinated efforts had collapsed entirely. McAllister deployed a final series of cannon strikes on remaining supply caches and defensive positions. Explosions tore through bunkers, ammunition depots, and hidden fortifications. The psychological blow was complete. What remained of the enemy force was leaderless, directionless, and terrified beyond repair. With precision strikes and psychological dominance, McAllister forced a full surrender. The jungle, once a silent battleground, was now littered with the remnants of a shattered force. The operation was not just a victory, it was a masterclass in strategy, improvisation, and psychological warfare. The island lay in ruins, but McAllister's mission was a resounding success. Casualties were high among the enemy, but his forces had emerged largely intact. The ingenuity displayed, combining guerrilla tactics, psychological manipulation, and mechanical innovation, would be studied by military strategists for decades. McAllister spent the following days organizing relief for prisoners, rebuilding local infrastructure, and securing remaining supplies. He understood that the true cost of war was not only measured in victory, but in human lives, and he moved swiftly to mitigate further suffering. Reports sent back to command detailed the operation, emphasizing not just the tactical brilliance, but also the creativity, courage, and leadership that had turned a small force into a decisive weapon. McAllister became a symbol, not just of victory, but of what human ingenuity could achieve under the most extreme circumstances. In the quiet that followed, McAllister reflected on the operation. The battles were brutal, the ingenuity required immense, and the psychological toll severe. Yet, the lessons learned were invaluable. A single mind, armed with creativity, courage, and precision, could achieve what armies often failed to do. He documented every innovation, every strategy, and every mechanical modification used during the campaign. These writings would later influence future military operations, shaping the design of assault strategies, forward-firing weaponry, and guerrilla tactics across the world. McAllister knew that while the battlefield was silent now, the legacy of the operation would echo through history. It was a testament to the fusion of intellect, courage, and relentless determination, a blueprint for turning the impossible into reality. After months of continuous operations, McAllister finally returned to base. Exhausted, scarred, but unbroken, he reunited with his team. The bonds formed in combat were unbreakable, forged in fire and refined in the chaos of battle. He also reconnected with the civilians and allies affected by the conflict. The liberation of prisoners, the destruction of enemy forces, and the restoration of order reminded him why he had fought with relentless determination. Every life saved, every victory secured, was a tribute to the ingenuity and resilience that had carried him through. News of McAllister's achievements spread rapidly through military channels. Reports highlighted not just his heroism, but the unprecedented innovation he displayed. The combination of psychological manipulation, guerrilla tactics, and mechanical expertise. Historians would later regard the campaign as a turning point in the theater of operations, a vivid example of how a single, innovative mind could rewrite the rules of engagement. McAllister's methods inspired future generations of strategists, soldiers, and engineers. His ingenuity became legend, immortalized in operational manuals, tactical studies, and personal accounts of those who survived the campaign. As the sun set over the island, McAllister stood atop the ridge one final time. The battlefield was silent. The enemy vanquished, the prisoners freed, the strategy proven. He knew that war never truly ends. Conflict is eternal. But for this campaign, he had turned chaos into order, terror into control, and ingenuity into decisive victory. The story of the island, the machine, and the mind behind it would endure, a lesson in courage, creativity, and relentless determination. And as night fell, the echoes of the past whispered through the jungle, reminding the world that even in the darkest hour, brilliance and bravery could rewrite the course of history.